The pipe wrench slipped from my grip and clattered against the basement floor as Simone's laughter drifted down through the floorboards above me. That particular laugh, the one she used to save for me during our early dating years, now seemed reserved for everyone except her husband. I'm Neil Forrester, 38 years old, and I fix computers for a living at the local college. Not exactly the most glamorous profession, but it pays the bills and keeps food on the table for my family. What I really love, though, is working with my hands, fixing cars in my spare time, tackling home repairs, anything that lets me create something tangible instead of wrestling with endless software glitches and password resets. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by hushed voices I couldn't quite make out. I wiped my hands on an old rag and climbed the creaky wooden stairs from our basement, emerging into the kitchen of our slightly run-down colonial house here in upstate New York. The place has character, as real estate agents like to say, which usually means it needs work, but has good bones. "Hey there, stranger," I called out, expecting to find Simone chatting with one of her friends from the college where she works as a PR director. Instead, I found her alone, phone pressed to her ear, pacing near the kitchen window that overlooked our backyard. "Oh, hi, honey," she said, covering the phone's mouthpiece with her palm. "Just talking to Margot about the fundraiser next week." She gave me that smile, the practiced one she'd perfected for faculty meetings and donor events. I nodded and grabbed a beer from the refrigerator, listening as she wrapped up her conversation with what sounded like genuine affection in her voice. Margot Chen had been Simone's best friend since college, and while I'd never particularly warmed to her tendency toward drama and gossip, she'd been a constant presence in our lives for years. "Where's Oliver?" I asked after she hung up. "Upstairs playing with those new building blocks your brother brought him last weekend." Simone moved to the sink and began rinsing dishes that were already clean, a nervous habit I'd noticed becoming more frequent lately. My brother Donovan, 2 years older than me, a literature professor at the same college where Simone and I both work, and according to just about everyone who meets our family, the source of my son's most striking feature. "He's got his uncle's eyes," people would say, usually followed by comments about how strong family resemblances can be. I'd heard variations of this observation dozens of times over the past 5 years, ever since Oliver was born. Those distinctive green eyes with flecks of gold, apparently a Forrester family trait that had skipped me entirely, but landed squarely on both Donovan and my son. I took a long drink of my beer and watched Simone continue her unnecessary dish-cleaning routine. She'd been working late more often recently, staying behind for emergency meetings and crisis management sessions that seemed to crop up with increasing frequency. The college's PR department had always been demanding, but Simone's dedication to her job had reached new heights over the past several months. "How was your day?" she asked, still focused on the spotless plates. "Fixed 3 computers, reset about 20 passwords, and listened to Professor Martinez complain about the new email system for the 4th time this week." I settled into one of our kitchen chairs, noting how the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the window caught the highlights in Simone's auburn hair. She was still beautiful at 36, still the woman who'd caught my attention at a faculty mixer 8 years ago with her quick wit and infectious laugh. "Sounds riveting," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The sound of small feet thundering down the stairs announced Oliver's arrival. My 5-year-old son burst into the kitchen with the kind of energy that only children possess, his dark hair tousled and those famous green eyes bright with excitement. "Dad, look what I built!" He thrust a complicated structure of interlocking blocks toward me, beaming with pride. "That's incredible, buddy. What is it?" "It's a castle with a secret passage and a tower where the king keeps his treasure." Oliver climbed onto my lap, settling in with the casual confidence of a child who knows he's welcome. "Uncle Donovan showed me how to make the secret door work." "Did he now?" I ruffled Oliver's hair, breathing in that distinctive scent of childhood, a mixture of shampoo, playground dirt, and something indefinably sweet. "When was Uncle Donovan here?" "Yesterday," Oliver said matter-of-factly. "He came over while you were at work to help me with my science project. We made a volcano that actually erupts." I glanced at Simone, who had moved on to wiping down counters that weren't dirty. "I didn't know we were expecting company yesterday." "It was spontaneous," she said without turning around. "Donovan called and offered to help with the volcano project since you've been so busy with that server upgrade." This was news to me. While it was true that I'd been putting in extra hours to implement new security protocols for the college's computer network, I'd specifically told Oliver we'd work on his science project together over the weekend. The idea that my brother had stepped in to fill that role without any discussion sat uncomfortably in my chest. "Well, I'm sure Uncle Donovan did a great job," I said, keeping my voice neutral for Oliver's sake. "But next time, maybe we can all work on projects together." Simone finally turned from the counter, her expression carefully composed. "Of course. I just thought it would be nice for Oliver to spend some quality time with his uncle. You know how Donovan loves being involved in his nephew's life." That much was certainly true. Donovan had been present for every major milestone in Oliver's young life. First steps, first words, birthdays, school events. He was the kind of uncle who remembered to bring gifts for no particular reason and who always seemed to have time for impromptu visits and activities. In many ways, he was more involved in Oliver's daily routine than some fathers manage to be with their own children. "Uncle Donovan has the same eyes as me," Oliver announced, apparently following his own train of thought. "Mrs. Patterson at school says we look just alike." "Family resemblance," Simone said quickly. "The Forrester genes are strong in both of you." I nodded and made appropriate sounds of agreement, but something cold was beginning to settle in my stomach. Not suspicion, exactly, not yet, but a kind of awareness that I'd been trying to ignore for months. Little things that didn't quite add up, conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, Simone's increased interest in her appearance and her job, Donovan's sudden enthusiasm for family time. "Can we have pizza for dinner?" Oliver asked, apparently satisfied with the genetics discussion. "Sure thing, buddy. Why don't you go wash your hands while I order?" As Oliver scampered off toward the bathroom, I found myself studying Simone's profile as she continued her cleaning routine. We'd been married for 7 years, together for 9, and I'd thought I knew all her expressions and habits. But lately, she seemed like someone wearing a carefully constructed mask of normalcy. "Everything okay at work?" I asked. "Fine, just the usual chaos. You know how it is during fundraising season." She moved to the refrigerator and began rearranging items that were already perfectly organized. "Margot and I have been putting in a lot of extra hours to make sure the donor event goes smoothly." "Right, the event." I couldn't remember her mentioning any specific fundraiser, but Simone's job involved a constant stream of college functions and PR campaigns. "When is that again?" "Next Friday. I'll probably be working late most of this week getting everything ready." She closed the refrigerator and finally looked directly at me. "You don't mind handling bedtime duty, do you? I know Oliver likes his routine." "Of course not. We'll manage just fine." And we would. Oliver and I had always been close, perhaps because I'd been more involved in the day-to-day parenting duties than many fathers. Simone's career demanded long hours and frequent evening events, which meant I'd handled my share of bath times, bedtime stories, and weekend adventures. Not that I minded. Some of my best memories involved just me and Oliver, working on projects or exploring the woods behind our house. The pizza arrived 45 minutes later, and we settled into our usual dinner routine. Oliver chattered about his day at kindergarten, Simone shared sanitized stories from her office, and I listened while trying to shake the growing sense that something fundamental had shifted in our household dynamic. After dinner, I supervised Oliver's bath, while Simone retreated to her home office to catch up on emails. This had become another new pattern, evening work sessions that kept her occupied until well after Oliver's bedtime. By the time I finished reading 3 chapters of Oliver's current favorite book and tucked him in for the night, I could hear the soft clicking of computer keys from downstairs. I found Simone at her desk, laptop open, phone beside her elbow. She looked up when I entered, quickly minimizing whatever she'd been working on. "How's the fundraiser planning going?" I asked. "Good. Complicated, but good. Margot and I are trying to coordinate with about 15 different departments, and you know how that goes." I did know. The college's bureaucracy could turn simple tasks into multi-week projects involving committees, forms, and endless email chains. It was one of the more frustrating aspects of working in academia. "Need any help? I could take a look at the technical requirements if you're planning any multimedia presentations." "Thanks, but we've got it covered. Besides, you've got your own projects to worry about." She was right about that. The server upgrade had been more complicated than anticipated, and I was already behind schedule. Still, her quick dismissal of my offer felt unnecessarily abrupt. "I'm going to grab a shower," I said. "Try not to work too late." "Just another hour or so. I want to finish this proposal while it's fresh in my mind." I headed upstairs, passing Oliver's room where I could hear the soft sound of his breathing through the partially open door. 5 years old and already showing signs of the intelligence and curiosity that ran in our family. He was a good kid, polite, funny, affectionate in the unconscious way of children who feel secure in their parents' love. The shower water was hot and helped ease some of the tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders. As I stood under the spray, I tried to analyze why I felt so unsettled. Simone working late wasn't unusual. Donovan spending time with Oliver wasn't suspicious. The comments about family resemblance were just the kind of thing people said without thinking. But taken together, these elements formed a pattern that made me increasingly uncomfortable. Not enough to justify confrontation or accusations, but enough to keep me awake at night, wondering if I was missing something obvious. I dried off and got ready for bed. brushing my teeth while staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. At 38, I was holding up reasonably well, still had most of my hair, still fit into the same jeans I'd worn in college, still looked like someone who worked with his hands despite spending most days behind a computer screen. My eyes were brown, unremarkable, nothing like the striking green that Oliver had inherited from somewhere in the Forrester gene pool. When I came back downstairs, Simone was still at her computer, phone now pressed to her ear. She was speaking in low tones, and something about her posture suggested this wasn't a work call. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, not quite eavesdropping, but not announcing my presence either. "I know," she was saying. "It's getting harder to find time. No, he doesn't suspect anything. Tomorrow afternoon should work if you can get away." My chest tightened. The conversation could have been about anything: surprise party planning, a gift consultation, any number of innocent topics. But the secretive tone and the careful way she was keeping her voice down suggested otherwise. I cleared my throat and stepped into the room. Simone spun around, eyes wide for just a moment before she composed herself. "I have to go," she said into the phone. "We'll talk tomorrow." She hung up and smiled at me. "Ready for bed?" "Who was that?" "Margot. We were going over some last-minute details for the event." The lie came smoothly, practiced, but I caught the slight flush that crept up her neck. "At 10:30 at night?" You know Margot. She's a night owl, and this was the first chance we've had to talk privately all day." I nodded, not trusting myself to respond without revealing my growing suspicions. Instead, I kissed her goodnight and headed upstairs, leaving her to finish whatever she was actually working on. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed listening to the sounds of the house settling around us, wondering when I'd become the kind of husband who questioned his wife's phone calls and work schedule, wondering if my suspicions were justified or if I was letting paranoia poison what had always been a solid marriage. Around midnight, I heard Simone's footsteps on the stairs. She slipped into bed beside me, careful not to disturb what she assumed was my sleep. But I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to decide what to do with the growing certainty that my wife was lying to me about something significant. The next morning brought our usual routine: coffee, breakfast, getting Oliver ready for school. Simone seemed more relaxed, chatting easily about weekend plans and Oliver's upcoming birthday party. But I noticed she kept her phone face down on the counter and checked it frequently when she thought I wasn't looking. "I'll probably be late again tonight," she mentioned as she gathered her things for work. "This fundraiser is turning into a bigger production than we anticipated." "No problem. Oliver and I can handle dinner and homework." She kissed me goodbye, the same quick peck she'd given me every morning for years, and headed out to her car. I watched through the kitchen window as she backed out of our driveway, noting that she immediately reached for her phone once she thought she was out of sight. Oliver and I finished breakfast together before I walked him to the bus stop at the end of our street. It was one of my favorite parts of the day, just the two of us, talking about whatever was on his 5-year-old mind, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the changing leaves. "Dad," he said, as we waited for the yellow school bus to appear around the corner, "why do people always say I look like Uncle Donovan?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Well, everyone says I have his eyes, but I look in the mirror and they just look like my eyes. I don't understand how eyes can belong to someone else." I knelt down to his level, studying that little face that had become the center of my world 5 years ago. He did have remarkable eyes, bright green with those distinctive gold flecks that seemed to catch and reflect light in unusual ways. They were beautiful eyes, expressive and intelligent, and apparently identical to my brother's. "It's just a way people talk about families," I said carefully. "Sometimes children inherit features from their parents or other relatives. It doesn't mean your eyes belong to anyone but you." Oliver considered this with the seriousness that children bring to philosophical discussions. "But I got my eyes from you and Mom, right? That's how it works?" "That's how it usually works, yes." The bus arrived before he could pursue the topic further, and I watched him climb aboard with his backpack and lunchbox, waving goodbye through the window as the bus pulled away. But his question stayed with me as I drove to work, adding another layer to my growing unease. At the college, I threw myself into the server upgrade project, grateful for work that required complete focus and left little room for speculation about my personal life. But during my lunch break, I found myself walking past Simone's office in the administration building, telling myself I was just being friendly. Through the glass door, I could see her at her desk, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing animatedly as she spoke. She looked engaged and professional, exactly like someone deep in fundraiser planning. But when she noticed me through the glass, her expression shifted to something that looked almost guilty before she smiled and waved. I waved back and continued walking, but the brief glimpse of her face stayed with me. That momentary look of panic before she recovered her composure. The way she'd quickly turned away from the door as I passed. The afternoon dragged by slowly. I finished the security updates I'd been working on and started organizing files for the next phase of the project. Around 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Simone. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." I stared at the message for a long moment, then made a decision that would have seemed paranoid just a week earlier. Instead of heading home after work, I drove to Reynolds's Tap, a blue-collar bar on the outskirts of town where I occasionally went to unwind after particularly frustrating days. The bar was dimly lit and half empty, exactly what I needed. I ordered a beer and settled into a corner booth where I could think without interruption. The place had the comfortable anonymity of a neighborhood establishment where people minded their own business and conversation was optional. Neil Forrester? I looked up to find Frank Morrison approaching my table. Frank was a retired police officer who'd helped me with some car repairs a few years back, and we'd maintained a casual friendship based on our shared interest in fixing things that were broken. "Hey Frank, how's retirement treating you?" "Can't complain. Mind if I join you? Haven't seen you in here before." I gestured to the empty seat across from me, grateful for the distraction. Frank was the kind of guy who'd seen enough of life's complications to be a good listener without being judgmental. "Just needed somewhere quiet to think," I said. "Work problems or home problems?" "Maybe both, maybe neither. Hard to tell." Frank nodded knowingly. "Been there. Sometimes it helps to talk it through with someone who doesn't have skin in the game." So I found myself telling Frank about my growing suspicions, the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way Simone seemed to be living a parallel life that didn't include me. I didn't mention Donovan specifically, not yet, but I laid out the pattern of behavior that had been troubling me. "Could be innocent," Frank said when I finished. "Could also be exactly what you think it is. Question is, what do you want to do about it?" "I don't know. Part of me thinks I should just ask her directly, but if I'm wrong, it could damage our marriage for no reason, and if I'm right..." I trailed off, not ready to voice that possibility. "If you're right, then your marriage is already damaged, and you're just deciding whether to acknowledge it." Frank's blunt assessment hit harder than I'd expected. He was right, of course. If Simone was having an affair, then our relationship was already fundamentally altered, regardless of whether I confronted her about it. "There are ways to find out for sure," Frank continued, "if you really want to know." "Such as?" "Depends how far you're willing to go, and how much you trust your instincts." I finished my beer while considering Frank's words. By the time I left the bar, I'd made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. I was going to find out the truth, whatever it cost me. The house was dark when I got home, Oliver already asleep and Simone still at her supposed work event. I checked on my son, watching him sleep peacefully in his small bed, surrounded by the toys and books that defined his 5-year-old world. Whatever was happening between his parents, he deserved to be protected from it as much as possible. I was reading in the living room when Simone's car pulled into the driveway around 11 o'clock. She came through the front door looking slightly disheveled, her professional composure showing signs of strain. "How was your evening?" I asked. "Long, productive, but long. Margot and I finally got the vendor contracts sorted out, so that's one less thing to worry about." She kicked off her shoes and settled onto the couch beside me. "What did you and Oliver do for dinner?" "Grilled cheese and soup. He helped me make chocolate chip cookies for dessert." "Sounds perfect." She leaned against me, and for a moment everything felt normal, like the old days when we'd end each day by sharing the small details of our separate routines. But when she shifted position, I caught a scent that didn't belong. Cologne that wasn't mine, faint but unmistakable. My chest tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. "I'm exhausted," Simone said. "I think I'll head up to bed." "I'll be up in a few minutes. Just want to finish this chapter." She kissed the top of my head and headed upstairs, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and the growing certainty that my marriage was built on lies I was only beginning to uncover. I ordered the DNA kit online during my lunch break on Tuesday, choosing overnight delivery and having it sent to my office rather than our home. The website made the process sound simple, just a cheek swab from each person, mail it back in the provided envelope, and wait for results. What they didn't mention was how the small box would feel like it weighed 100 pounds when it arrived. Hannah Rodriguez, the secretary in the main office, signed for the package and brought it to my desk with her usual cheerful efficiency. She was one of those people who kept the college running through sheer organizational competence, and over the years, we'd developed the kind of casual workplace friendship that made difficult days more bearable. "Expecting something exciting?" she asked, noting my reluctance to open the package immediately. "Just some technical equipment for a project I'm working on at home," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. Hannah nodded and returned to her desk, leaving me to stare at the innocuous brown box that might contain the answers to questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. The kit sat unopened in my desk drawer for the rest of the afternoon while I tried to focus on routine maintenance tasks that required no real concentration. By 5 o'clock, I'd made another decision that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. Instead of going straight home, I drove to Donovan's apartment complex on the other side of town. My brother lived in one of those modern developments that catered to young professionals. All clean lines, expensive fixtures, and amenities that justified the premium rent. I parked across the street and waited, feeling like some kind of amateur detective in a bad television show. But after 20 minutes, my patience was rewarded. Donovan's silver sedan pulled into the complex parking lot, and I watched him get out, carrying what looked like takeout containers and a bottle of wine. Nothing suspicious about that. A single man in his 40s buying dinner and wine on a Tuesday evening was perfectly normal behavior. But something about his demeanor, the way he kept checking his phone, the careful attention he paid to his appearance before heading inside, suggested this wasn't just another quiet night at home. I waited another 10 minutes, then drove home to find Oliver building elaborate structures with his blocks in the living room. The concentration on his face as he worked reminded me of myself at that age, completely absorbed in whatever project had captured my imagination. "Hey, buddy, where's Mom?" She had to go back to work after dinner. Something about an emergency meeting. Oliver didn't look up from his construction project. "She said you'd help me with my math homework when you got home." An emergency meeting on Tuesday night. That was a new addition to Simone's expanding repertoire of work obligations. I helped Oliver with his math worksheets, supervised his bath, and read him 3 chapters of his current favorite book before tucking him in for the night. "Dad," he said, as I was turning off his bedside lamp, "do you think I'll look more like you when I get older?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because everyone always talks about how I look like Uncle Donovan, but I want to look like my dad too." Something twisted in my chest. "You know what? I think you look exactly like yourself, and that's perfect." Oliver smiled and settled deeper into his pillow. "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, buddy, more than you can possibly imagine." I stood in his doorway for a long moment after he fell asleep, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest, listening to the soft sounds of childhood sleep. Whatever else happened, whatever truths I uncovered or lies I exposed, this little boy would always be my son in every way that mattered. Simone came home around 10:30, looking frazzled and apologetic. "Sorry I'm so late. The crisis with the donor database turned out to be more complicated than we thought. Margot and I spent 3 hours trying to recover corrupted files." "Computer problems?" I asked, genuinely curious since that was my area of expertise. "Something about a server crash. Way beyond my technical knowledge, but apparently it threatened to wipe out our entire contact list for the fundraiser." I nodded sympathetically, but something about her explanation didn't ring true. The college's donor database was maintained by the IT department, my department, and I would have been the first person called if there had been any kind of server emergency. No one had contacted me about database problems or corrupted files. "Did they get it sorted out?" "Eventually. Thank goodness for backup systems, right?" "Right. Backups are important." We went through our usual bedtime routine, but I found myself studying Simone's face as she removed her makeup and brushed her teeth. She looked tired, but there was something else in her expression, a kind of nervous energy that didn't match someone who'd spent the evening dealing with technical difficulties. That night, I lay awake until I was certain she was sleeping, then carefully extracted myself from bed and went downstairs to my home office. The DNA kit was still in my briefcase, and I sat at my desk staring at it for nearly an hour before finally opening the package. The instructions were straightforward: 2 separate swab kits, each labeled and sealed in sterile packaging. I opened the first one and followed the directions, scraping the inside of my cheek with the provided swab and sealing it in the designated container. The second kit went into my desk drawer, waiting for the right opportunity to collect Oliver's sample. That opportunity came the next morning while Oliver was brushing his teeth before school. I made it into a game, telling him I wanted to check if he was doing a good job cleaning his teeth. He opened his mouth obligingly, and I quickly swabbed the inside of his cheek while pretending to examine his molars. "Perfect brushing job," I told him, and he beamed with pride. The samples went out in the morning mail, with results promised within 5 to 7 business days. Now all I had to do was wait and try to act normal while my world potentially crumbled around me. But I wasn't content to wait passively. Frank Morrison had mentioned there were ways to find out what I needed to know, and I found myself thinking about his words more frequently. Wednesday evening, I made an excuse about needing to pick up parts for a car repair and drove to Reynolds's Tap. Frank was there, as I'd hoped he would be, nursing a beer and reading a paperback novel in the same corner booth where we'd talked earlier in the week. "Back again?" he said as I approached. "Must be some serious thinking you're doing." "Getting more serious by the day. Can I buy you another beer?" "Sure, but let me guess. You've decided you want to know for certain what your wife is up to." I ordered 2 beers and settled into the booth across from Frank. "How did you know?" "Because I've seen that look before. It's the look of a man who's tired of wondering and ready to start finding out." Frank closed his book and leaned forward. "Question is, are you prepared for what you might discover?" "I don't think anyone's ever prepared for that, but not knowing is driving me crazy." Frank nodded slowly. "Okay, here's what we're going to do." What we did was follow Simone, not in any dramatic movie-style car chase, but with the methodical patience of someone who understood surveillance. Frank had equipment, a GPS tracking device that could be attached to a car's undercarriage, a camera with a telephoto lens, and most importantly, the experience to use both without getting caught. "This feels wrong," I said as we crouched beside Simone's car in our driveway Thursday morning, Frank attaching the small magnetic device to the frame behind the rear wheel. "Wronger than being lied to by your wife?" Frank asked pragmatically. "Look, we're not breaking any laws here. This is your house, your driveway, and you're married to the woman who drives this car. Legally, you're in the clear." That didn't make me feel much better about it, but I didn't stop him either. The GPS tracker connected to an app on Frank's phone, showing Simone's location in real time throughout the day. Her morning routine was exactly what I expected. Straight to the college, parked in her usual spot behind the administration building. But around noon, the little dot on Frank's phone began moving in an unexpected direction. "She's heading toward the north side of town," Frank said, showing me the screen. "Anywhere she might have legitimate business over there." I studied the map, recognizing the area as a mix of residential neighborhoods and small businesses. "Not that I can think of. Most of the college vendors and donors are either downtown or on the south side near campus." We were sitting in Frank's pickup truck in the parking lot of a hardware store, far enough away to avoid being spotted, but close enough to respond quickly if the tracking dot stopped moving. After 20 minutes of driving through residential streets, it did exactly that. "Bingo," Frank said, zooming in on the location. "Maple Street. Nice neighborhood. Know anyone who lives over there?" My stomach dropped as I recognized the address. "That's where my brother lives." Frank gave me a look that was equal parts sympathy and vindication. "Want to go take a look?" We drove to Maple Street and parked at the far end of the block, Frank's telephoto lens trained on the apartment complex where the GPS showed Simone's car. Sure enough, her blue Honda was parked in the visitor section, and through the camera's viewfinder, we could see lights on in what I knew was Donovan's third-floor apartment. "How long do you want to wait?" Frank asked. "As long as it takes." We waited 2 hours. 2 hours during which I had plenty of time to think about what this meant, what it confirmed, and what I was going to do about it. When Simone finally emerged from the building, her hair was different, looser, more casual than the professional style she'd worn to work that morning. She walked to her car with the relaxed gait of someone who'd just spent a pleasant afternoon, checking her phone and smiling at whatever she saw on the screen. "Got it," Frank said, lowering the camera. Pictures of her going in, pictures of her coming out, timestamps for both, plus GPS data showing exactly where she was and for how long. I stared at the evidence of my wife's betrayal, feeling strangely numb. Part of me had been hoping I was wrong, that there would be some innocent explanation for all the suspicious behavior, but the photographs on Frank's camera told a story that was impossible to misinterpret. "What now?" Frank asked. "Now I wait for the DNA results." They arrived the following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after I'd mailed the samples. The envelope was thin and official-looking, addressed to me at my office rather than our home. Hannah signed for it and brought it to my desk with the same cheerful efficiency she brought to all her tasks, completely unaware that she was delivering a potential bomb. I waited until lunch break to open it, sitting alone in my car in the college parking lot. The report was clinical and straightforward, full of technical language about genetic markers and statistical probabilities. But the conclusion was clear enough. Based on the analysis of the submitted samples, the alleged father cannot be excluded as the biological father of the child tested. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. 0%? Not low probability, not inconclusive results, but absolute certainty that I was not Oliver's biological father. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the paper that had just redefined my entire life. 5 years of believing Oliver was my son, 5 years of loving him with the complete devotion that fathers feel for their children, and now I knew that biologically he belonged to someone else. But the report had included an additional analysis I'd requested, a comparison between Oliver's DNA and a sample I'd obtained from Donovan's coffee cup during a family dinner the previous weekend. The results of that test were equally definitive. Probability of paternity between subject A, child, and subject B, alleged father. 99.97%. My brother was Oliver's biological father. The family resemblance that everyone commented on wasn't coincidence or shared genetics from distant relatives. It was the direct result of Donovan and Simone's affair, an affair that had been going on for at least 6 years and had produced the child I'd been raising as my own. I drove home that evening in a strange state of calm, the DNA report sealed in an envelope in my briefcase. Oliver was in the backyard when I arrived, playing on the swing set I'd installed for his 3rd birthday. He ran to me with his usual enthusiasm, throwing his small arms around my legs in the kind of spontaneous hug that had always been the highlight of my day. "Dad, guess what happened at school today?" I knelt down to his level, studying that face I'd memorized over 5 years of bedtime stories and morning conversations. He still looked like my son. He still felt like my son. The DNA results hadn't changed the fundamental bond we'd built together, even if they'd revealed the biological truth I'd been trying so hard to avoid. "What happened at school, buddy?" "Mrs. Patterson said I'm the best reader in the whole kindergarten class, and she's going to let me help teach the other kids who are still learning their letters." "That's fantastic. I'm so proud of you." And I was proud of him. Proud of his intelligence, his kindness, his curiosity about the world around him. The fact that he'd inherited those qualities from Donovan rather than me didn't diminish my feelings or my role in nurturing them. Simone was in the kitchen when we came inside, preparing dinner with the same domestic efficiency she'd maintained throughout our marriage. She looked up when we entered, smiling at Oliver's excited chatter about his day at school. "How was work?" she asked me, the same question she'd asked thousands of times over the years. "Interesting," I said, which was certainly true. "Very revealing day." If she noticed anything unusual in my tone, she didn't show it. We ate dinner as a family, helped Oliver with his homework, and went through our normal evening routine. But I found myself studying both Simone and Oliver with new eyes, seeing details I'd previously overlooked. The way Oliver's laugh was identical to Donovan's, the way he gestured with his hands when he was excited, exactly like his biological father, the way Simone watched him sometimes, with an expression that might have been guilt, or might have been the complex emotions of a woman raising her child with a man who didn't know the truth. That night, after Oliver was asleep and Simone was absorbed in her laptop, I sat in my home office and made a plan. Not a plan for confrontation or dramatic revelation, but a plan for justice. A plan that would give everyone involved exactly what they deserved. Oliver's 6th birthday was 3 weeks away. We'd already sent invitations to family and friends, already planned the party menu and decorations. It would be the perfect opportunity to share some important family news. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the DNA report, reading it one more time to make sure I hadn't misunderstood anything. Then I placed it carefully in a manila envelope and wrote, "Happy birthday, Oliver," on the outside in my neatest handwriting. 3 weeks to plan, 3 weeks to prepare, 3 weeks to decide exactly how I wanted to handle the moment when everyone in our family learned the truth about Oliver's parentage and the lies that had defined our relationships for the past 6 years. I was looking forward to it. Oliver's 6th birthday party was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, and by Friday evening, our house was decorated with superhero-themed balloons, streamers, and a banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Oliver," in bright primary colors. Simone had outdone herself with the preparations, creating the kind of celebration that would generate dozens of photos and years of happy memories. I helped with the decorating, maintaining the cheerful demeanor of an excited father while the DNA report sat in my desk drawer like a loaded weapon. 24 hours until detonation, and I was surprised by how calm I felt. The nervous energy that had plagued me for weeks had been replaced by a cold sense of purpose. "I think this might be our best party yet," Simone said, stepping back to admire the transformed living room. "Oliver's going to be so excited when he sees everything tomorrow." "It looks perfect," I agreed. "Very festive. Great atmosphere for sharing important family moments." She smiled at me, apparently missing the edge in my voice. We'd been married long enough that she should have recognized when I was operating on multiple levels, but Simone had been distracted by her own secrets for months. "I picked up the cake this morning," she continued. "Chocolate with vanilla frosting, just like he requested, and I got those number candles that sparkle when you light them." "Wonderful. I love surprises at birthday parties. Speaking of which, I have something special planned, too." "Oh? What kind of surprise?" "You'll see tomorrow. I think everyone will find it very educational." Saturday morning arrived with the crisp brightness of early autumn. Oliver woke up with the explosive energy that only birthday children possess, racing downstairs in his pajamas to see what surprises awaited him. Simone and I had already placed his presents under the birthday banner, and he tore through them with the focused intensity of a 6-year-old on a mission. "This is the best birthday ever," he announced after opening the last gift, a complicated building set that would keep him occupied for hours. "Wait until your party this afternoon," Simone said. "Grandma and Grandpa are coming, and Uncle Donovan, and all your friends from school." At the mention of Donovan's name, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest. But today would be the last day I had to pretend everything was normal. Today would be the day everyone learned the truth. "Can I play with my new toys until the party starts?" Oliver asked. "Of course, buddy. It's your birthday." He settled onto the living room floor with his building blocks, and I retreated to my office to make final preparations. The DNA report was still in its manila envelope, sealed and ready. I'd made copies of the relevant pages, highlighting the key conclusions in yellow marker so there would be no confusion about what the results meant. The original report went into a birthday card, one of those oversized cards with cartoon characters and glittery letters that children love. On the inside, I'd written, "Happy 6th birthday, Oliver. Here's some important information about our family. Love, Dad." Perfect. Innocent enough to be opened in front of everyone. Dramatic enough to ensure the maximum impact. Guests began arriving around 2 o'clock. My parents came first, carrying wrapped presents and wearing the indulgent smiles that grandparents reserve for birthday celebrations. Simone's father arrived shortly after, followed by 3 families from Oliver's kindergarten class and their children. Donovan was the last to arrive, as usual. He had a gift for making entrances, timing his appearances for maximum effect. Today he carried an elaborate present wrapped in expensive paper, and Oliver ran to him with the kind of enthusiasm that had always seemed perfectly natural. "Uncle Donovan, you came." "Wouldn't miss it for the world, buddy. Happy birthday." Donovan lifted Oliver into a hug, and I watched them together with new eyes. The resemblance was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. Not just the eyes, but the shape of their faces, the way they both tilted their heads when they were thinking, the identical dimple that appeared when they smiled. How had I missed it for so long? How had everyone in our family failed to see what was right in front of us? The party proceeded according to plan. Children ran around the backyard, parents made small talk over coffee and cake, and Oliver basked in the attention that comes with being the birthday boy. Simone moved through the crowd with practiced ease, playing the role of the perfect hostess while Donovan entertained the kids with magic tricks and silly jokes. They were both good at their performances, I had to admit. Natural actors who could maintain their facade even under pressure, but in a few minutes the show would be over. "Time for cake," Simone announced, and everyone gathered around the dining room table where the chocolate birthday cake sat surrounded by presents and decorations. Oliver climbed onto his chair, grinning as we sang "Happy Birthday," and the sparkler candles cast dancing shadows across his face. He made a wish and blew out all 6 candles in one breath, earning applause and cheers from the assembled crowd. "Present time," someone called out, and Oliver began working his way through the pile of wrapped gifts. Books, toys, games, clothes, the usual assortment of birthday offerings from family and friends. "Here's one more," I said, stepping forward with a large birthday card. "This one's special." Oliver took the card with both hands, struggling slightly with its size. "It's really big, Dad?" "Big surprises come in big packages sometimes." He opened the card carefully, reading the cartoon message on the front before flipping to the inside. The DNA report fell out onto the table with a soft rustling sound, and Oliver stared at it with the confusion of a 6-year-old trying to understand adult paperwork. "What is it?" he asked. "It's information about our family," I said clearly, making sure everyone in the room could hear me. Very important information that I thought everyone should know. Simone had gone very still, her eyes fixed on the papers in Oliver's hands. Donovan was standing behind Oliver's chair, and I watched the color drain from his face as he recognized what he was looking at. "Neil," Simone said quietly, "what is this?" "DNA test results," I announced to the room. I thought it was time we solved the mystery of Oliver's famous family resemblance. The room had gone completely quiet. Parents stopped their conversations, children sensed the sudden tension and moved closer to their mothers and fathers, and my own parents stared at me with expressions of growing alarm. "The results are quite interesting," I continued, taking the papers from Oliver's hands and holding them up for everyone to see. "It turns out that Oliver is not my biological son. 0% probability of paternity. But there's more." I flipped to the second page of results, the one comparing Oliver's DNA to Donovan's. It turns out Oliver does have a biological father in this room, his Uncle Donovan. 99.97% probability of paternity. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the distant sound of traffic outside, the rapid breathing of people trying to process what I'd just revealed. Simone's hands were shaking as she reached for the papers. "Neil, please, not like this. Not in front of everyone." "When would have been a better time?" I asked conversationally. "After another year of lies? After another birthday party where everyone comments on the family resemblance? After Oliver starts asking more questions about why he doesn't look anything like his supposed father?" Donovan was staring at the floor, his face flushed with shame and panic. My parents looked stunned, glancing back and forth between me, Simone, and their grandson, who was still sitting in his birthday chair, surrounded by the wreckage of what had been a perfect party. "I don't understand," Oliver said in a small voice. "What does this mean?" "It means," I said, kneeling down to his level, "that Uncle Donovan is actually your biological father, and your mother has been lying to all of us for 6 years." "Neil, stop," my father said sharply. "This is not appropriate." "What's not appropriate is adultery," I replied. "What's not appropriate is fraud. What's not appropriate is letting a man raise another man's child while everyone in the family knows the truth but pretends otherwise." "We didn't know," my mother protested. "We never suspected—" 17 people, I interrupted. 17 different people have commented on Oliver's resemblance to Donovan in my presence over the past 6 years. 17, and not one of you thought that might be significant. The other party guests were beginning to gather their children and make excuses to leave. I didn't blame them. This wasn't the kind of family drama that strangers wanted to witness, but I wasn't finished yet. "Simone," I said, turning to face my wife directly, "would you like to explain to everyone how long this affair has been going on, or should I share what I've learned from my own investigation?" She was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she clutched the DNA results. "Please, Neil, we can talk about this privately. We don't need to do this in front of Oliver. Oliver deserves to know the truth about his parentage, and frankly, so does everyone else who's been participating in this charade." Donovan finally found his voice. "Neil, I'm sorry. We never meant for it to happen this way." "Which way did you mean for it to happen?" I asked. "Were you planning to tell me eventually? Or were you just going to keep letting me raise your son while you played the role of the devoted uncle?" "It's complicated." "No, it's really not. You had an affair with my wife. She got pregnant. You both decided to let me believe the child was mine. That's not complicated. That's just dishonest." The room was almost empty now, just immediate family and the wreckage of Oliver's birthday party. Cake sat uneaten on plates, presents lay scattered across the table, and my son sat in the middle of it all, trying to understand why his birthday had turned into a nightmare. "I think we should go," my mother said quietly, reaching for Oliver's hand. "This conversation should happen privately." "Actually," I said, "I think this conversation is over. Simone, I'll be filing for divorce on Monday morning. Donovan, I'd appreciate it if you'd stay away from my house and my family until the legal situation is resolved." "Your family?" Simone said through her tears. "Neil, please, we can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can figure out how to move forward." "Move forward?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Simone, you've been lying to me for 6 years. You've been having an affair with my brother for 6 years. You let me believe I was Oliver's father while you both knew the truth. What exactly is there to work out?" Oliver is your son in every way that matters," she said desperately. "You've raised him, you love him, he loves you. The biology doesn't change that." She was right about that, at least. Oliver was still the center of my world, still the child I'd taught to ride a bike and read bedtime stories to every night. But the foundation of trust that had made our family possible was gone, shattered by the revelations that had taken me weeks to uncover and seconds to reveal. "The biology changes everything," I said quietly, "because it means our entire marriage has been built on a lie." I stood up and looked around the room at the faces of my family, my parents, who looked stunned and heartbroken, my brother, who couldn't meet my eyes, my wife, who was still crying and clutching the DNA results like they might somehow change if she held them tightly enough. "Oliver," I said, turning to the birthday boy who had been forgotten in the drama of adult revelations, "why don't you go upstairs and play with your new toys? The grown-ups need to finish talking." He nodded solemnly and slipped out of his chair, gathering an armful of presents before heading toward the stairs. At the doorway, he paused and looked back at me. "Dad? Are you still going to be my dad?" The question hit me harder than anything else that had happened that afternoon. "Always, buddy. No matter what happens, I'll always be your dad." He smiled, that beautiful smile that I now knew he'd inherited from Donovan, and disappeared upstairs, leaving the adults to deal with the consequences of their choices. "Well," I said to the remaining crowd, "I think that concludes Oliver's birthday party. Thank you all for coming. It's been very educational. My parents left first, promising to call later once everyone had time to process what had happened. Simone's father followed, shooting angry looks at both his daughter and Donovan before stalking out the front door. That left just the three of us, the triangle of deception that had defined our family for 6 years. What happens now? Simone asked. Now you pack your things and find somewhere else to stay, I said. I'll be changing the locks tomorrow, and I've already moved our joint funds into accounts that only I can access. If you want to continue this relationship with Donovan, that's your choice, but you won't be doing it in my house or on my dime. You can't just throw me out, she protested. This is my home, too. Actually, the house is in my name only. Wedding gift from my parents, remember? You have no legal claim to it. Donovan was still standing by the dining room table, looking like he wanted to disappear entirely. Neil, we should talk about Oliver, about custody and visitation and... We'll let the lawyers handle that, I interrupted. I have no interest in discussing anything with you directly. He's my son, too, Donovan said quietly. Now he is. For the past 6 years, he was mine. Interesting how quickly your parental instincts have awakened. I left them standing in the dining room and went upstairs to check on Oliver. I found him in his bedroom, building elaborate structures with his new toys, apparently absorbed in the kind of imaginative play that had always been his refuge from the adult world. Having fun with your presents? Yeah, this building set is really cool. Look, I made a castle with a secret passage. I sat on his bed and watched him work, marveling at his ability to focus on simple pleasures despite the chaos that had erupted around him. Children were remarkably resilient, but they also deserve protection from adult complications that they were too young to understand. Oliver, you know that no matter what happens with the grown-ups, you'll always be my son, right? And I'll always love you just as much as I do right now. He looked up from his building blocks, those distinctive green eyes serious and thoughtful. I know, Dad. You're the best dad in the whole world. I stayed with him until he fell asleep that night, reading extra chapters from his favorite book and listening to his prayers, which included thanks for his birthday presents and requests for blessings on his family. When I finally went downstairs, the house was empty. Simone and Donovan were gone, leaving behind only the remnants of the party and the DNA results still scattered across the dining room table. I cleaned up methodically, throwing away paper plates and leftover cake, packing up decorations that would never be used again. The birthday banner came down last. Happy birthday, Oliver! In cheerful letters that seemed to mock the disaster the celebration had become. But as I worked, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. The lies were finally out in the open. The pretense was over. Whatever happened next, it would be built on truth rather than deception. I was looking forward to the next phase of this story. Monday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency of a new beginning. I woke up early, made coffee, and got Oliver ready for school with the same routine we'd followed for months, but everything felt different now, cleaner somehow. The weight of suspicion and uncertainty had been replaced by the clarity that comes with knowing exactly where you stand. Is Mom coming back today? Oliver asked over breakfast, apparently having noticed that Simone hadn't been home when he woke up. Mom is staying somewhere else for a while, I said carefully. But you'll still see her. We're just working out some grown-up problems. He nodded with the acceptance that children show when adults provide explanations that make sense within their limited understanding of the world. 6-year-olds don't need to know about adultery and DNA tests and the complex legal machinery of divorce. They just need to know that they're loved and safe. After dropping Oliver at school, I drove straight to the law offices of Patterson and Associates, where I'd made an appointment to see Margaret Patterson, one of the most respected divorce attorneys in town. She was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes, someone who'd built her reputation on handling complicated cases with discretion and efficiency. Mr. Forrester, she said, gesturing for me to take a seat in her office, I understand you have some unusual circumstances to discuss. I handed her copies of the DNA test results and a folder containing photographs of Simone entering and leaving Donovan's apartment, along with GPS tracking data showing the frequency of her visits. Margaret studied the evidence with the methodical attention of someone who'd seen every variation of marital betrayal. This is quite comprehensive, she said finally. How long have you suspected the affair? Actively suspected? About 3 weeks. But looking back, I think it's been going on for at least 6 years, probably longer. And the child? Oliver is 5 years old. According to the DNA results, my brother is his biological father. Margaret made notes on a yellow legal pad, asking questions about our finances, our property, and my goals for the divorce proceedings. I explained that I wanted full custody of Oliver, and despite the biological complications, and that I had no interest in reconciliation or mediation. The adultery gives us significant leverage, she said, especially with the DNA evidence. The fraud aspect, allowing you to believe you were the father while knowing otherwise, could be grounds for additional damages. I'm not interested in revenge through the legal system, I said. I just want this resolved quickly and cleanly, with Oliver's best interests protected. Understood. I'll have papers drawn up and served by the end of the week. From the lawyer's office, I drove to the bank, where I closed our joint checking and savings accounts and opened new ones in my name only. The process required some paperwork and explanations, but the bank manager was sympathetic and efficient. By noon, Simone's access to our shared finances was completely cut off. Next stop, the phone company, where I removed Simone from our family plan and changed the passwords on all our shared accounts. Then the credit card companies, where I canceled all cards that bore her name. By the time I finished my rounds, Simone would find herself financially isolated, dependent on whatever resources she could access independently. I felt a grim satisfaction in the systematic dismantling of our shared life. Each canceled account and changed password was a small act of justice, a consequence for 6 years of lies and betrayal. The real satisfaction, though, came from my next stop, the college campus, where I had some information to share with the right people. Hannah Rodriguez was at her desk in the main office when I arrived, sorting through the morning mail with her usual efficiency. Over the years, we'd developed the kind of casual workplace friendship that made difficult days more bearable, and I knew she could be trusted with sensitive information. "Neil, how was Oliver's birthday party? I hope he loved that building set you picked out." "The party was very educational," I said. "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I've learned some interesting things about my family recently, and I thought you should know since it might affect college policy." I showed her copies of the DNA results, explaining the situation in clinical terms. Hannah's eyes widened as she processed the implications. A tenured professor having an affair with a staff member's wife, producing a child, and maintaining the deception for years. "Oh my goodness," she said. "Neil, I'm so sorry. This must be devastating for you." "It's been a learning experience. The thing is, I'm not sure who else might be affected by this situation. Professor Forrester has been in a position of authority here for years, and if he's willing to maintain this kind of deception in his personal life..." I let the implication hang in the air. Hannah was smart enough to understand what I was suggesting, that Donovan's professional ethics might be as compromised as his personal ones. "I think Dr. Martinez should know about this," she said quietly. Dr. Martinez was the department head, a man who took faculty conduct seriously and had little tolerance for scandal. "I think you're right. Faculty members are supposed to maintain certain standards, especially when it comes to relationships with other employees' families." Hannah promised to handle the information discreetly but thoroughly. By the end of the week, Donovan's affair and the DNA results would be common knowledge among the college administration. His reputation as a family values professor would be permanently tarnished, and his chances for promotion or tenure review would be severely damaged. I drove home feeling satisfied with the morning's work. The legal, financial, and professional consequences of Simone and Donovan's affair were now in motion, grinding forward with the inexorable momentum of bureaucratic machinery. But I wasn't finished yet. That evening, I called Frank Morrison and asked him to meet me at Reynolds's Tap. Frank was waiting in our usual booth when I arrived, a beer already ordered for me and a knowing expression on his weathered face. "I'm guessing the birthday party didn't go as planned," he said. "Actually, it went exactly as planned. I shared the DNA results with the whole family. Very educational for everyone involved." Frank raised his beer in a mock toast. "To family education. How did they take it?" "About as well as you'd expect. Simone cried, Donovan couldn't look anyone in the eye, and my parents looked like they'd been hit by a truck. And Oliver? He's resilient. Kids usually are, as long as the adults in their lives don't completely fall apart." Frank nodded approvingly. "So, what's the next phase of your education campaign?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the GPS tracking data we'd collected on Simone's movements. "I've been thinking about your comment that information wants to be shared, especially information that might be of interest to the community." "Such as?" "Such as the fact that a respected college professor has been having an affair with a colleague's wife for 6 years, producing a child, and lying about it to everyone involved." Frank grinned. "You know, there are people in this town who would find that very interesting. People who like to share interesting information with their friends and neighbors. I was hoping you might know some of those people." What Frank knew was Dolores McKenzie, a 70-year-old retired librarian who ran the most efficient gossip network in 3 counties. Dolores had a Facebook page with over 2,000 local followers, and she posted daily updates about everything from lost cats to city council meetings to the personal lives of anyone foolish enough to provide her with material. Dolores loves a good scandal, Frank said, especially one involving hypocrisy and family drama. If you give her the DNA results and some background information, she'll have it spread across half the county by Wednesday. Will she be discreet about her sources? Dolores protects her sources better than the Washington Post. No one will know the information came from you unless you want them to. Perfect. By Thursday, everyone in town would know about Donovan and Simone's affair. The college community would be buzzing with gossip, Donovan's reputation would be destroyed, and Simone would find herself the subject of the kind of social scrutiny that made small towns so unforgiving. There's one more thing, I said. I want to make sure Donovan understands the full scope of the consequences he's facing. Frank leaned forward, interested. What did you have in mind? Something personal, something that hits him where he lives. Donovan's pride and joy was his vintage 1967 Mustang convertible, a cherry red beauty that he'd restored himself over the course of several years. He kept it in pristine condition, drove it only on special occasions, and treated it like the most precious thing he owned. It represented everything he valued about himself: style, craftsmanship, attention to detail, and the kind of masculine competence that impressed women and intimidated other men. You're not thinking of doing anything illegal, are you? Frank asked. Nothing illegal, just creative expression. Wednesday evening, I drove to Donovan's apartment complex and parked across the street, waiting for him to leave for his usual dinner at Romano's Italian restaurant. He was a creature of habit, and Wednesday nights always meant dinner alone at the same corner table where he could see and be seen by other diners. When his silver sedan pulled out of the parking lot, I gave him a 10-minute head start, then walked casually to the visitors' parking area where the Mustang sat under a protective car cover. I pulled the cover back carefully, revealing the immaculate red paint and chrome details that Donovan spent hours maintaining. The magnetic signs I'd had made at a local print shop were simple but effective. Adulterer in large black letters on white backgrounds, one for each side of the car. I attached them carefully to the doors, making sure they were straight and clearly visible. But the real masterpiece was the message I painted across the windshield in washable white paint. I fathered my brother's child. The paint would come off easily with the right solvents, so I wasn't causing permanent damage. But it would take time and effort to remove, and in the meantime, everyone who saw the car would know exactly what kind of man drove it. I replaced the car cover and walked back to my own vehicle, satisfied with the evening's work. Donovan would discover my message the next morning when he left for work, and by the time he figured out how to remove the paint and magnetic signs, half the college campus would have seen his mobile confession. Thursday morning brought the first consequences of my information campaign. Hannah called to let me know that Dr. Martinez had requested a meeting with Donovan to discuss personal conduct issues that might affect his professional standing. The college administration was taking the situation seriously, especially given the potential for scandal and negative publicity. How is Professor Forrester handling the attention? I asked. Not well. He came in this morning looking like he hadn't slept, and when he saw his car in the faculty parking lot... Hannah paused. Well, let's just say the maintenance crew had to help him clean off some unauthorized decorations. I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Donovan's humiliation was now public knowledge, and his carefully constructed image as a respected academic and devoted family man was crumbling in real time. But the best part was still to come. Dolores Mackenzie's Facebook post went live Thursday afternoon, complete with copies of the DNA results, with Oliver's name redacted for privacy, and a detailed account of the affair, the deception, and the dramatic revelation at the birthday party. Within hours, the post had been shared dozens of times and generated over 200 comments from local residents expressing shock, outrage, and the kind of moral indignation that small communities reserve for spectacular falls from grace. Can you believe this happened right here in our town? One comment read. I always thought there was something off about that family, wrote another. That poor husband. 6 years of lies. How do you recover from something like that? By Friday morning, the story had spread beyond social media. The local newspaper called to ask if I wanted to comment on the situation, and I politely declined. The college's public relations department issued a brief statement about respecting the privacy of employees during personal difficulties, but the damage was done. Everyone knew, everyone was talking, and everyone had an opinion. Simone called me Friday evening, her voice shaking with anger and humiliation. Neil, you have to stop this. The whole town is talking about us. I can't go anywhere without people staring and whispering. Interesting, I said. How does it feel to have your private business become public knowledge? This isn't fair. You're destroying our lives over a mistake." "A 6-year mistake that produced a child? That's not a mistake, Simone. That's a choice. A series of choices that you and Donovan made every day for 6 years. What about Oliver? How is this helping him?" "Oliver is fine. He's with me, where he belongs, and he's protected from the consequences of your decisions. You should have thought about Oliver before you decided to have an affair with my brother." She hung up without saying goodbye, but I knew she'd call again. Desperation had a way of making people persistent. Saturday morning brought the final piece of information I'd been waiting for. Margaret Patterson called to let me know that the divorce papers had been served and that Simone's initial response had been predictably hostile. "She's demanding joint custody and spousal support," Margaret said. "Her attorney is arguing that the biological paternity is irrelevant since you've acted as Oliver's father for 5 years. What are our chances?" "Excellent. The adultery, the fraud, and the DNA evidence give us overwhelming leverage. Plus, the public nature of the scandal works in our favor. No judge wants to be seen rewarding this kind of behavior." "And Donovan?" "He hasn't filed for custody yet, but his attorney has been in touch. They're exploring their options." Perfect. Let them explore. Let them scramble and strategize and try to find some way to salvage their reputations and their relationship. Meanwhile, I had Oliver. I had the truth, and I had the satisfaction of watching 6 years of lies finally catch up with the people who'd told them. The lockdown was complete. Simone and Donovan were financially isolated, professionally compromised, and socially ostracized. Their affair was public knowledge, their reputations were destroyed, and their options were limited to whatever scraps of dignity they could salvage from the wreckage of their choices. But I still wasn't finished with them. The best part was yet to come. That evening, I tucked Oliver into bed and read him an extra chapter of his favorite book, listening to his prayers and marveling at his resilience. He was adjusting to the new routine with the flexibility that children possess when the adults in their lives provide stability and love. "Dad," he said as I was turning off his bedside lamp, "are you happy?" The question surprised me. "What do you mean, buddy?" "You seem different lately, like you're not worried about things anymore." Smart kid. He'd inherited his intelligence from somewhere, and apparently he was observant enough to notice changes in the emotional atmosphere of our household. "I'm happier now than I've been in a long time," I said honestly. Sometimes grown-ups have to deal with difficult problems, and it feels good when those problems get solved. "Good. I like it when you're happy." I kissed his forehead and watched him settle into sleep, then went downstairs to my office where I opened my laptop and began planning the next phase of my education campaign. Because while the lockdown had been effective, it was only the beginning. Simone and Donovan had taken 6 years from me. 6 years of lies, 6 years of deception, 6 years of making me look like a fool in front of my own family. It was time for them to understand what 6 years of consequences looked like. The call came at 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the divorce papers had been served. I was making breakfast for Oliver when my phone rang, displaying a number I didn't recognize but a voice I knew all too well. "Neil, we need to talk." Simone's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "It's about Oliver." I glanced at my son, who was absorbed in arranging his cereal into perfect rows, completely unaware of the adult drama swirling around him. "What about Oliver?" "I'm taking him for a few days, just until we can work out a more reasonable custody arrangement." Something cold settled in my stomach. "You're not taking him anywhere. The temporary custody order is very clear about that." "The temporary custody order is based on lies and manipulation," she said, her voice rising. "Oliver is Donovan's son, and we have rights too." "You have the rights that the court gives you, which currently amount to supervised visitation twice a week, nothing more. That's going to change. Donovan's attorney says we have grounds to challenge the custody arrangement, especially since you've been poisoning the whole community against us." I walked into my home office, closing the door so Oliver wouldn't overhear the conversation. "I haven't been poisoning anyone against you. I've simply been sharing the truth about your 6-year affair and the fraud you perpetrated against me and my son." "Our son," she corrected. "And if you think you can keep him from his biological father indefinitely, you're wrong." Leaving me with the distinct impression that Simone and Donovan were planning something desperate, I called Margaret Patterson immediately. "They can't legally take Oliver without court approval," she assured me, "but desperate people don't always act legally. You might want to take some precautions." The precautions I took were simple, but effective. First, I called Oliver's school and informed them that under no circumstances should my son be released to anyone other than me without written authorization. Then, I installed a GPS tracking device in Oliver's backpack, the same type Frank had used to track Simone's movements, but smaller and more discreet. Finally, I called Frank himself. Sounds like your ex-wife and brother are getting restless, he said when I explained the situation. Want some backup? I want to be prepared for whatever they're planning. Smart. Desperate people make stupid choices, and stupid choices create opportunities for the other side. That opportunity came sooner than expected. Thursday afternoon, I was working on a server maintenance project when Hannah Rodriguez appeared at my office door, looking worried. Neil, I just got a strange call from Oliver's school. Apparently, a woman claiming to be his mother tried to pick him up early, saying there was a family emergency. My chest tightened. Did they release him? No, they followed your instructions and refused. But the woman became very upset and had to be escorted off school property by security. I thanked Hannah and immediately called the school to confirm that Oliver was safe and still in his classroom. Then I called Frank. They're making their move, I said. Simone just tried to take Oliver from school. Figured they would. Question is, what's their next play? We didn't have to wait long to find out. The GPS tracker in Oliver's backpack showed him leaving school at the normal time and boarding his usual bus. But instead of heading toward our neighborhood, the bus route was diverted to an unfamiliar part of town. I was already in my car when Frank called. Your boy's moving toward the industrial district. That's not anywhere near his normal route. I drove toward the GPS coordinates, my mind racing through possibilities. Had Simone somehow arranged to intercept the school bus? Had she convinced the driver there was an emergency? Or was something else happening that I hadn't anticipated? The GPS signal stopped moving near a small office complex on the outskirts of town. I parked across the street and called Frank, who arrived 10 minutes later in his pickup truck. See anything? He asked. Oliver's signal is coming from that building over there, the one with the for lease signs in the windows. Frank pulled out a pair of binoculars and studied the building. There's a car parked behind it. Blue Honda, looks like your wife's. My wife's car, but not my wife's legal right to take our son anywhere without court approval. I called 911 and explained the situation, a custody dispute, possible kidnapping, GPS evidence showing the child's location. Officers are on their way, the dispatcher assured me. Do not attempt to confront the subjects yourself. But I wasn't planning to confront anyone. I was planning to document everything that happened next, creating a record that would end any possibility of Simone and Donovan gaining custody of Oliver. The police arrived 15 minutes later, 2 patrol cars, and a supervisor who took the situation seriously once I showed him the custody order and explained the GPS evidence. We approached the building together, and through the windows we could see Simone, Donovan, and Oliver sitting at a small table in what looked like a temporary office setup. Oliver appeared to be unharmed but confused, looking back and forth between the 2 adults as they spoke to him in low, urgent tones. Simone was gesturing animatedly, apparently trying to explain something complicated to a 6-year-old who just wanted to go home. The police knocked on the door, and I watched Donovan's face go pale as he realized their plan had been discovered. Simone opened the door with a forced smile, as if entertaining unexpected guests rather than being caught in the middle of a kidnapping. Officers, thank goodness you're here, she said. We were just having a family meeting to discuss some important changes in Oliver's living situation. Ma'am, we understand there's a custody dispute, the senior officer said. We're going to need to see some identification and documentation of your legal right to have this child with you. While Simone fumbled through her purse for identification, Oliver spotted me through the window and ran toward the door. Dad, what are you doing here? Mom said there was an emergency at home and I had to come with her right away. I knelt down and hugged him, relief flooding through me as I confirmed he was safe and unharmed. There's no emergency, buddy. Mom made a mistake about the pickup arrangements. The police sorted out the situation quickly. Simone had no legal right to remove Oliver from school or take him anywhere without my permission. Her claim of a family emergency was fabricated, and her attempt to circumvent the custody order constituted custodial interference. We're not going to arrest anyone today, the senior officer said, but this needs to be the last time something like this happens. Ma'am, you need to follow the court order exactly. No exceptions, no emergencies, no family meetings without proper authorization. Simone's face was flushed with anger and humiliation as she realized her plan had not only failed, but had been documented by law enforcement. Donovan looked like he wanted to disappear entirely, apparently having discovered that kidnapping was more stressful than he'd anticipated. This isn't over, Simone said to me as the police escorted her to her car. Oliver deserves to know his real father. Oliver knows his real father, I replied. The man who's raised him for 6 years, loved him every day, and protected him from people who make bad decisions. I drove Oliver home, listening to his chatter about the strange afternoon and his confusion about why Mom had told him there was an emergency when everything seemed fine. 6-year-olds don't understand adult desperation, and I intended to keep it that way. That evening, I called Margaret Patterson to report the incident and discuss how it might affect our custody case. "This actually helps us significantly," she said. "Custodial interference demonstrates poor judgment and disregard for court orders. It's exactly the kind of behavior that convinces judges to restrict parental access." "What about Donovan? Can he file for custody independently?" "He can try, but his chances just got much worse. Participating in an attempt to circumvent existing custody orders doesn't look good for someone claiming to have the child's best interests at heart." Perfect. Simone and Donovan's desperation was working in my favor, creating legal ammunition that would protect Oliver and ensure that their access to him remained limited and supervised. But I wasn't content to simply react to their moves. It was time to take the initiative and remind them that actions have consequences. Friday evening, I drove to Donovan's apartment complex with a specific purpose in mind. His precious Mustang was parked in its usual spot, still bearing faint traces of the washable paint I'd used for my previous message. Apparently, he hadn't been able to completely remove all evidence of his mobile confession. This time, I had something more permanent in mind. The custom magnetic signs I'd ordered were more elaborate than my first attempt. "Kidnapper" in large red letters, with smaller text underneath reading, "Ask me about my custodial interference arrest." I attached them to both sides of the car, making sure they were perfectly aligned and clearly visible. But the real artistic statement was the banner I stretched across the apartment complex's main entrance. "Welcome to Maple Gardens, home of Professor Donovan Forrester, who had an affair with his brother's wife and then tried to kidnap the child." The banner was made of weather-resistant vinyl and secured with zip ties that would require tools to remove. It would be visible to every resident, visitor, and delivery person who entered the complex, ensuring that Donovan's neighbors understood exactly what kind of man lived among them. I photographed my handiwork and sent copies to Frank, who responded with a text message consisting entirely of laughing emojis. Saturday morning brought the predictable phone call from Donovan, his voice shaking with rage and humiliation. "Neil, you have to stop this. My neighbors are complaining to the management company, and my car has been vandalized twice since Thursday." "Vandalized? Those are just informational displays. Public service announcements, really." "This is harassment. I could have you arrested." "For what? Telling the truth? Sharing factual information about your behavior? I thought professors valued the free exchange of ideas." "You're destroying my life over a mistake." "No, I'm documenting the consequences of your choices. There's a difference." He hung up, but I knew he'd call again. Desperation made people persistent, and Donovan was definitely desperate. The banner stayed up for 3 days before apartment complex management removed it, but the damage was done. Every resident of Maple Gardens now knew their neighbor's story, and several had taken pictures that ended up on social media with comments like, "This is what happens when you mess with family," and "Professor Pervert gets what he deserves." Donovan's social isolation was now complete. His professional reputation was destroyed, his personal relationships were toxic, and his living situation had become untenable. The college community avoided him, his neighbors shunned him, and his family had disowned him. But I still wasn't satisfied. 6 years of lies deserved more than professional embarrassment and social ostracism. They deserved a finale that would ensure everyone understood the full scope of what Simone and Donovan had done and what it had cost them. It was time for the final confrontation. I spent the next week making preparations, calling in favors, and arranging for the kind of public spectacle that would end this story definitively. Not with violence or illegal activity, but with the kind of truth-telling that left no room for denial or rationalization. The venue I chose was perfect. The college's annual faculty appreciation dinner, a formal event that drew hundreds of attendees from the academic community and local business leaders. Donovan would be expected to attend, despite his recent troubles, and Simone would likely be there as well, since she still technically worked for the college's PR department. I bought a ticket and reserved a table near the front of the ballroom, close enough to the podium to ensure that everyone would have a clear view of what I had planned. Because it was time for one final lesson in the consequences of betrayal, and I intended to make sure it was a lesson that no one would ever forget. The education campaign was about to reach its climax, and I was looking forward to graduation day. The college's annual faculty appreciation dinner was held at the Grand Ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, a venue that had hosted decades of academic ceremonies, fundraising galas, and community celebrations. The room was elegant in the way that institutional events aspired to be: crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and the kind of formal atmosphere that made people speak in hushed tones and check their posture. I arrived early, wearing my best suit and carrying a leather portfolio that contained the final chapter of my story. The evening's program included dinner, awards presentations, and brief remarks from various department heads about the year's accomplishments. Perfect timing for some additional remarks that hadn't been scheduled. Donovan was already there when I entered, standing near the bar with a group of literature faculty who seemed to be maintaining polite but distant conversation. He looked uncomfortable, constantly checking his watch and glancing toward the exit as if calculating escape routes. His usual confidence had been replaced by the nervous energy of someone who knew he was unwelcome but couldn't afford to miss the event. Simone arrived 20 minutes later, accompanied by Margot Chen and 2 other women from the PR department. She'd chosen a black cocktail dress that was appropriate for the occasion, but couldn't disguise the strain that had aged her noticeably over the past month. Her smile was brittle, her laugh too loud, and her movements had the careful precision of someone trying very hard to appear normal. I watched them navigate the social minefield of the reception, noting how conversation stopped when they approached and resumed in whispers after they moved on. The college community was small enough that everyone knew the story by now, and formal events like this became exercises in public judgment disguised as professional courtesy. My own table was strategically positioned near the front of the room, close enough to the podium that I'd have easy access when the time came. Frank Morrison was there as my guest. I'd bought an extra ticket and invited him to witness the conclusion of our investigation. He was dressed in his best suit and looked like a retired police officer trying to blend in at an academic function, which was exactly what he was. "Nervous?" Frank asked as we took our seats. "Excited," I corrected. "This has been building for weeks, and I'm ready to see how it ends." Dinner was served with the efficiency that hotel catering provided for large events. Predictable food, adequate wine, and enough time between courses for networking and conversation. I made small talk with the other people at our table, maintaining the pleasant demeanor of someone enjoying a normal evening out. But I was watching Simone and Donovan throughout the meal, noting how they carefully avoided each other despite being in the same room. Their affair had become a public liability that neither could afford to acknowledge, even though everyone present knew about their relationship and its consequences. The awards presentations began around 9 o'clock, with various faculty members receiving recognition for research achievements, teaching excellence, and community service. Dr. Martinez, the department head who'd been dealing with the fallout from Donovan's scandal, presented most of the awards with the diplomatic grace that academic administrators cultivated for difficult situations. "And now," Dr. Martinez said as the formal presentations concluded, "we'd like to open the floor for any additional remarks from our faculty and staff community." This was my moment. I stood up and walked toward the podium, my portfolio in hand and my heart beating with the anticipation of someone about to complete a long and complicated project. The room grew quiet as I approached the microphone, hundreds of faces turning toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. "Good evening," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "For those who don't know me, I'm Neil Forrester, IT administrator here at the college. I've worked here for 8 years, and I've been part of this community for my entire adult life." I paused, scanning the audience until I found Simone and Donovan. Both were staring at me with expressions of growing horror as they realized what was about to happen. Tonight, I'd like to share some important information about family values, professional ethics, and the consequences of choices that we make when we think no one is watching. Dr. Martinez was making subtle gestures from his seat at the head table, apparently trying to signal that this wasn't an appropriate use of the open remarks period. But I was already committed to my course of action. 6 weeks ago, I discovered that my wife of 7 years had been having an affair with my brother for the past 6 years. I also discovered that the child I'd been raising as my son was actually the biological product of their relationship. The room was completely silent now, the kind of silence that occurs when social boundaries are being crossed in real time. I could see people glancing at each other, checking their phones, and looking toward the exits as they processed what they were hearing. "Now, I know what some of you are thinking," I continued. "Personal family problems shouldn't be discussed at professional events. Private matters should remain private. But here's the thing. When 2 members of our college community engage in fraud, deception, and custodial interference, it stops being a private matter." I opened my portfolio and pulled out enlarged copies of the DNA test results, holding them up for the audience to see. These are certified DNA test results showing that Professor Donovan Forrester is the biological father of the child that I raised for 5 years, believing him to be my son. These results also show that my wife, Simone Forrester, who works in our PR department, allowed me to support and love this child while knowing the truth about his parentage. Simone had gone completely pale and was gripping the edge of her table as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Donovan was staring at the floor, apparently hoping that if he didn't make eye contact with anyone, he might somehow become invisible. But wait, There's more, I said, channeling the enthusiasm of a television commercial. Last week, these same two individuals attempted to remove my son from his elementary school without authorization, in direct violation of a court-ordered custody arrangement. I pulled out copies of the police report from the custodial interference incident, along with photographs of the office building where they'd taken Oliver. Fortunately, modern technology allowed me to track my son's location and coordinate with law enforcement to ensure his safe return. The police documented the entire incident, and both individuals received official warnings about violating custody orders. The audience was beginning to murmur now, some people clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of my revelations, while others seemed fascinated by the real-time destruction of two colleagues' reputations. Now, I want to be clear about something, I continued, raising my voice slightly to regain attention. I'm not here tonight seeking sympathy or support. I'm here to ensure that our community understands the full scope of what has happened and what it means for our professional standards. Dr. Martinez was standing now, apparently preparing to intervene, but I pressed forward before he could reach the microphone. Professor Forrester teaches courses on family dynamics and moral philosophy. He's written papers about the importance of honesty in relationships and the ethical obligations that adults have toward children. Meanwhile, he was maintaining a 6-year deception that directly contradicted every principle he claimed to value. I turned toward Donovan's table, making direct eye contact for the first time that evening. And Ms. Forrester, who works in our public relations department, spent years crafting messages about the college's commitment to integrity and family values while living a lie that made a mockery of both concepts. Simone was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she realized that her professional reputation was being destroyed in front of her colleagues and supervisors. Several people at her table were looking away, apparently unwilling to be associated with the spectacle she'd become. But here's what I find most interesting, I said, returning my attention to the broader audience. For 6 years, dozens of people in this room commented on the family resemblance between my son and his uncle. 17 different individuals made specific remarks about their identical eyes, their similar facial features, their shared mannerisms. I paused for effect, letting the implications sink in. 17 people noticed the resemblance, but not one person thought to mention it to me directly or suggest that it might be significant, which means that either our entire community is remarkably unobservant, or some of you suspected the truth and chose to remain silent. The discomfort in the room was palpable now. People were shifting in their seats, checking their phones, and having whispered conversations with their table mates. The formal atmosphere of the faculty dinner had been replaced by the tension of a public confrontation that no one knew how to handle. So, here's my question for all of you, I said, leaning into the microphone for emphasis. What does it say about our community when fraud and adultery can continue for 6 years with dozens of witnesses, and the only person who doesn't know the truth is the victim? Dr. Martinez reached the podium and placed his hand on my shoulder, clearly intending to end my presentation, but I wasn't finished yet. In conclusion, I said quickly, I want to thank Professor Forrester and Ms. Forrester for providing such a comprehensive education in the consequences of poor choices. Their 6-year curriculum in deception, adultery, and custodial interference has been truly enlightening. I gathered my papers and stepped away from the podium, leaving Dr. Martinez to deal with the aftermath of my presentation. The room erupted in conversations as people processed what they'd just witnessed, some shocked, some outraged, some clearly entertained by the dramatic conclusion to what had been a routine faculty dinner. Frank was grinning as I returned to our table. That was better than television, he said quietly. Look at their faces. Simone and Donovan were both standing now, apparently preparing to leave as quickly as possible. But their path to the exit required walking past dozens of tables filled with colleagues who were now staring at them with expressions ranging from disgust to morbid curiosity. It was a walk of shame that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. Mr. Forrester, Dr. Martinez said, approaching our table with the diplomatic composure that academic administrators used for crisis management. That was highly inappropriate. Faculty dinners are not the venue for personal grievances. You're absolutely right, I agreed. Personal grievances should be handled privately between the people involved. But when those people are faculty members and staff who violated professional ethics, it becomes a community concern. Dr. Martinez looked like he wanted to argue the point, but the logic was sound and we both knew it. Donovan's behavior had already become a matter of official college concern, and Simone's involvement made it a staff issue as well. This will need to be addressed through proper channels, he said finally. I look forward to participating in that process. Frank and I left the hotel shortly after my presentation, driving to Reynolds's Tap for a celebratory drink. The bar was quieter than usual for a Saturday night, which suited my mood perfectly. I wanted to process what had just happened and plan for whatever came next. "So what now?" Frank asked as we settled into our usual booth. "You've pretty much burned down everything they built. Professional reputation, social standing, family relationships, all gone." "Now Oliver and I get to build something new," I said. "Something based on truth instead of lies." "And them?" I thought about Simone and Donovan, probably sitting in one of their cars in the hotel parking lot, trying to figure out how to salvage something from the wreckage of their public humiliation. They get to live with the consequences of their choices. For the rest of their lives, everyone in this community will know exactly what kind of people they are. Frank raised his beer in a toast. To consequences. To education, I corrected, and to the end of a very long semester. We drank to the conclusion of my revenge campaign, but I knew the real celebration would come later when I got home to Oliver. He was spending the evening with my parents, probably already asleep in the guest room that had become his second home during the chaos of recent weeks. Tomorrow, I would explain to him that the grown-up problems were finally resolved and that our life could return to something approaching normal. Not the old normal, which had been built on lies, but a new normal based on truth and the unshakable bond between a father and his son. Because regardless of biology, regardless of DNA, regardless of the complicated adult drama that had defined the first 6 years of his life, Oliver was my son in every way that mattered. I'd raised him, loved him, protected him, and guided him through the early stages of becoming the person he was meant to be. Simone and Donovan could have their biological connection and their shared genetics and their family resemblance that everyone always commented on. What they couldn't have was the relationship that Oliver and I had built together, day by day, through thousands of small moments that had nothing to do with DNA and everything to do with love. That was mine, that was ours. And no amount of adult foolishness could take it away from us. The education campaign was over, the lessons had been learned, and justice had been served with the kind of public thoroughness that ensured everyone understood the stakes involved in betraying family trust. Now it was time to go home and start the next chapter of our story. Just Oliver and me, building a future based on honesty, love, and the unbreakable bond between a real father and his son. The final grades had been posted, and everyone had gotten exactly what they deserved. Class dismissed.